The night was darker than usual, the kind of darkness that seemed to swallow everything whole. A heavy storm raged outside, lightning splitting the sky in brief, blinding flashes. Inside a small, dimly lit house, on the edge of town, two young brothers huddled together, their tiny hands clutching each other for warmth and comfort. They didn't know it yet, but this was the last night they would ever spend together. Their father, a kind and hard-working man, had been their protector, their guide, their entire world. But fate had a cruel way of changing everything in an instant. That night, tragedy struck. An accident, swift and merciless, took their father's life. The moment news spread, their fragile world crumbled. The house they once called home was no longer theirs. Strangers and distant relatives, people they barely knew, came and went, making decisions for them, deciding where they would go and with whom. And just like that, the brothers were torn apart. The younger one, barely 5, was too small to understand what was happening. He cried, screamed for his brother, but no one listened. His tiny fingers slipped from the grasp of the only family he had left. The older one, just 10, was forced to let go. He fought, he begged, but he was too young, too powerless. His last sight of his little brother was of him being carried away, his cries fading into the distance. Years passed. Time moved forward, but some wounds never truly heal. The older brother, now a grown man, had spent years searching. He never forgot, never gave up. He had no photos, no clues, only a memory of tear-filled eyes and a promise made in a broken whisper. "I'll find you." The younger brother, meanwhile, had been raised by another family in another city. His childhood erased like a page torn from a book. He didn't remember his past. The memories were blurry shadows in the back of his mind. An image of warmth, of safety, of someone who once held his hand. But the world had changed him. Life had shaped him into someone different, someone hardened by the years. Then, one day, something happened. Something neither of them saw coming. A twist of fate, a chance encounter, a moment that would change everything. And, just like that, after years apart, the two brothers were about to meet again. But the real question was, would they recognize each other? Would they still be the same? Or had life turned them into strangers? What happened next? No one could have predicted. The city was alive with movement, cars rushing past, people lost in their own worlds, conversations blending into the hum of everyday life. Among them, two men walked separate paths, unaware that fate was about to bring them face to face. The older brother, now in his late 20s, had never stopped searching. Every city he moved to, every street he walked down, he carried the same hope that one day he would find his little brother. But the years had made the search harder. No records, no clues, just a name that had probably changed long ago. Yet, something inside him refused to let go. The younger brother, on the other hand, had no idea someone was looking for him. Life had shaped him into a different person. Growing up in a foster home, he had learned to survive on his own. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. He had built walls around himself, shutting out anything that reminded him of the past. There were nights he would dream of a blurry figure, a voice calling his name. But every time he woke up, it slipped away like smoke. Then came the day that changed everything. It happened in the most unexpected way. An ordinary afternoon, a crowded street, a brief moment where time seemed to slow. The older brother had stopped by a small cafe, staring out the window as people passed by. And that's when he saw him. It was just a glimpse. A man walking past, lost in thought. But something about him felt familiar. The way he moved, the way he carried himself. The older brother's heart pounded in his chest. It couldn't be. It wasn't possible. But still, he had to know. He rushed outside, weaving through the crowd, his eyes locked on the man who unknowingly held the answers he had been searching for. "Hey!" he called out, his voice shaking. The younger brother stopped, turning slightly. Their eyes met for the first time in over 20 years. There was no immediate recognition, no dramatic realization, just two strangers staring at each other, one desperate for answers, the other confused by the intensity in the stranger's eyes. "Do I know you?" the younger one asked, his voice guarded. The older brother hesitated. How could he explain everything in a single moment? How could he make him remember a life he had long forgotten? "I think..." His voice broke slightly. "I think you're my brother." Silence. A second passed, then another. The younger man's expression hardened. He had heard many things in his life. Lies, manipulation, empty promises. Why would this be any different? "You have the wrong person," he said, turning to leave. "No. Wait." The older one stepped forward, desperation clear in his voice. "I know it sounds crazy, but please, just listen. You were taken from me when we were kids. I've been searching for you ever since." The younger brother's jaw tightened. Something about those words made his chest tighten, but he didn't want to believe it. "You're wasting your time," he muttered, walking away, but something had shifted inside him. That night, for the first time in years, he couldn't sleep. Memories he thought were long buried started surfacing. Images of a warm hand holding his, a voice telling him everything would be okay. His past, the one he had forced himself to forget, was knocking on the door he had locked away. The older brother wasn't ready to give up. He found out where the younger one worked, showing up the next day, waiting outside. "I know you don't believe me," he said the moment their eyes met again. "And I don't blame you. But give me one chance to prove it." The younger brother sighed. He didn't know why, but something in him didn't want to walk away just yet. "Fine," he said. "One chance." And so they sat together for the first time in years. The older brother told him everything about their father, their home, the night they were separated. He described things no stranger could have known. Details that began to chip away at the wall the younger one had built. Doubt crept in. Could it be true? Had he really had a brother all along? But just as the pieces started falling into place, the real conflict began. Someone didn't want them to reunite. Someone who had kept the younger brother away for a reason. And now, the past was coming back, dangerous, unpredictable, and ready to destroy everything before the truth could be revealed. The younger brother felt like the ground beneath him was shifting. His whole life, he had believed he was alone. Now, this man, this stranger, was telling him he had a brother, a family, a past that had been stolen from him. It was too much, but deep down, something about it felt real. Still, just as he was starting to open his heart, things took a dangerous turn. Someone was watching them. A man in a dark coat lingered near the cafe where they had met. Another shadow followed them down the street. At first, the younger brother thought it was just his mind playing tricks on him. But when his apartment was broken into that night, he knew it was something more. The older brother had suspected this. All along, someone had kept them apart on purpose. And now that he had found his brother, that same force was trying to stop them from uncovering the truth. Digging into the past led them to a name, an old family friend who had taken legal custody of the younger brother after their father's death. But instead of raising him with love, the man had erased all traces of his past, ensuring the brothers would never find each other. Why? Because their father had left behind something valuable, something worth hiding. The brothers started piecing everything together. Their father had owned a small piece of land, seemingly worthless at the time. But now, years later, it had become a gold mine due to the city's expansion. That land, rightfully theirs, had been stolen. The truth had been buried along with their memories. The younger brother felt a storm of emotions: anger, betrayal, grief. He had spent his whole life believing no one wanted him, when in reality, he had been kept away. All those nights he had spent feeling lost. All those years he had tried to forget where he came from. It had all been someone else's doing. But the older brother had never stopped looking. He had never forgotten. And now they had a choice: walk away from the past, or fight for what was taken from them. They chose to fight. Confronting the man responsible wasn't easy. He was powerful, connected, and had spent years covering his tracks. But the truth had a way of finding its way to the surface. With enough pressure, enough digging, the lies started to crack. Documents surfaced. Legal records proving the land had never rightfully changed hands. Witnesses came forward, people who had stayed silent out of fear, but could no longer ignore what was right. In the end, justice was served. The man who had torn them apart was exposed for his lies, and everything he had stolen was taken back. But for the brothers, the victory wasn't just about the land or the truth. It was about finding each other again. Standing together, looking at the place where they had once lived. As children, they realized something important. The past had shaped them, but it didn't have to define them. They weren't the same boys who had been separated all those years ago, but they were still brothers. And after everything, that was enough. As they walked away, side by side, there were no more questions, no more doubts. The search was over. They had found their way back to each other, and no one could take that away from them again.